calling oysters meat rocks is one of my favorite things in the world because it's what they are. I had an old hatchery manager who was like, we killed some stuff in the hatchery by accident. It was a pep talk where he was like, we gotta shape up here. And he's like, they look like rocks, but they're alive. And I was like, oh, meat rocks. If I ever have my own oyster farm, it's gonna be Meat Rock Farms for sure. Please don't take that if you're listening. But, yeah.
It's on the record.
Yeah. There we go. Meat Rock Farms. It's mine. I'm Aldo Griffo-Hahn. I'm the Mariculture Program Coordinator here at the University of Alaska Southeast in Sitka.
Welcome to another Mariculture Minute, a podcast about shellfish, seaweed, and salmon in Alaska. And today, we're talking with Aldo about oysters, his experience in Maine and Alaska, and how various smells of aquaculture compare.
Like rotting skate has this particular ammonia-y, just sharp smell. It wakes you up and you're like, oh God, that's bad.
I just completed the Alaska aquaculture semester here in Sitka, and I wanted to talk to Aldo because he did it all. He drove the vans, managed tons of logistics, taught us boating skills, how to tie knots, prepared farming gear for both shellfish and seaweed, taught us how to culture algae, made sure our wetsuits were the right size. He even got us ice cream. I wanted to hear more of Aldo's experience in mariculture. And just a note for this first bit, my mic pooped out, and this audio is my backup phone recording on the table.
Sure. It all started when I worked for a company called Running Tide, which was a tech company that was dealing with some shellfish as well as selling kelp for carbon credits. But that was my first exposure to shellfish, was working in their shellfish hatchery. I'd previously been working on a lobster boat, and I'd seen all these floats out in the water and kind of got curious about them, gave them a Google. Turns out it was more in line with my interests, was working in a shellfish hatchery than out in the water. That's how it started with that. And then I worked on our grow-out operations, working with some FLUPSYs as well as working with just traditional bags. And then I ended up back in the hatchery, and now I'm here.
Cool. And this was basically in Maine?
Yeah, this was in the Brunswick-Harpswell area of Maine. Most of our sites were in Harpswell.
Aldo just mentioned a few oyster farming terms I wanted to highlight. Hatchery, grow out, FLUPSY, and traditional bags. So, to put it all together, oyster farmers help spawn baby oysters in a hatchery, which is like a lab. When they're big enough, this is the grow out phase. The oysters are moved out of the lab into a FLUPSY. FLUPSY stands for Floating Upwelling System. A FLUPSY is a floating platform on the ocean with different cage-like compartments. The FLUPSY pumps ocean water up through the compartments to feed the oysters. Oysters are filter feeders. They get their food as water passes through them. The FLUPSY keeps that flow of water constant so the oysters can grow. When the oysters are even bigger, the oyster farmer moves them to floating mesh bags or cages. In the bags, the oysters filter feed on the ocean water until they're big enough to be sold to restaurants, to you. They're ready to be eaten. Look, I'm new to the world of oysters, and I have to admit, at first glance, a meat rock says it all. I was curious to hear what Aldo thought about why people love them.
Yeah, it's a great way to sort of like bring everyone together and you're to open up a little present, and each one's different. Each one shucks differently. There's a great little tactile response to opening up a food item and then eating it. It's great. It's a lot of fun too, because you get your friends around you, some of your friends are handy and some of your friends will stab themselves. And, it's fun to be like, all right, I'm going to take that knife away from you and I'll be shucking these. And, and then some people surprise you and are wizards at it. Yeah, they're a great social food, a couple dozen oysters. No one's mad when that shows up to a party. I've gotten a lot of wedding gifts have been solved by me just buying 10 dozen oysters from my buddies who have farms, and that covers me.
Breaking away from enjoying oysters, I want to go on a little tangent. I'm always curious to learn about people's reactions to the smells of mariculture because the ocean definitely has its share of odors, and I'm always curious how people who work on the water think of the smells. How does oyster smell rate on a scale with like other ocean stuff? Like,
it's a specifically bad smell that I can definitely pick out.
Okay.
If there's a bouquet of bad smells, I'm like, that's oyster. That's rotting clam or rotting shellfish. It is nothing compared to what I've smelled in a bait tray for like bait and lobster pots. It's like rotting skate has this particular ammonia-y, just sharp smell. Like wakes you up and you're like, oh God, that's bad. And then any freshwater fish that's rotting in salt water is an especially heinous smell.
So oyster's better than fish?
I'd say so. Yeah, it's less because the fish has all the oils in it and it's getting everywhere, and it's just, I feel like the oyster stink washes off easier. Fish stink, if you get bait juice on you, that's not leaving for a while.
What about seaweed? Is seaweeds ever?
Seaweeds just kind of get ammonia-y. Yeah, it's more vegetal. You know, like it's definitely it's a better smell, and it doesn't linger as long. Like if you leave a bin of seaweed on deck and it bakes in the sun, it's like that's bad, but it just kind of whiffs away. Whereas like the fish stink is really what has stuck with me. Like I have a pair of bibs that I used when I was lobstering, and they still smell bad. Like 3 years, 5 years later. Like I left them in Maine. They're in my garage in Maine for sure.
In my garage, I have a bunch of old DVDs. I love movies, and I'm always on the lookout for mariculture themed films. Like some kind of seaweed sci-fi epic, or maybe a movie about a monster scallop. So far, I've had no luck in finding anything. I asked Aldo if he heard of any mariculture movies that weren't documentaries. We couldn't think of any, but he did offer this.
Yeah, I can tell you like horror stories of on farms when you open up a bin that you forgot about, and you're like, oh man, this has turned into an oyster reef. And they're all dead.
Oh no!
It happens if something gets sunk and you forget about it, or you just overload it for the week and you don't have time to get to something. Then
what does it look like?
It looks like a reef. It depends on the gear that it's in. But we had these giant FLUPSY bins where series of storms, like we couldn't get out there, and some boats broke down, and just it was a perfect storm of just bad circumstances that prevented us from adequately working the oysters for like a week or two because they're so young and they're under a FLUPSY, which is a forced water system. They're being force fed basically. They were growing so much, and they're pooping so much, and they just basically cemented themselves into this solid block of shell and pseudofeces and silts, and it was, you open it up and it smelled horrible, and they were like, we had to cull it because we were we wanted to save what we could out of it, but it was grim work picking through that giant pile, and there was just like dead fish in there. Like it was pretty nasty.
That sounds gross.
Yeah, we had we also found half a seagull in one of our one of our bins once, which was pretty gross.
That will give me nightmares. But something that won't give me nightmares is the beautiful state of Maine. I used to spend summers there. There was this amusement park in York Beach. Come to think of it, there was a funhouse there that absolutely terrified me. Nightmare City. I think it gave me a fear of opening doors. But all in all, a lovely state. Since Aldo has worked in Maine and now Alaska, I was curious how he thought the two places were different. He mentions the landscape differences with Alaska's pointy coastline. The water is colder with lower salinity, so oysters grow slower in Alaska, which makes them taste different. We also talk about how the word aquaculture can be a touchy subject in Alaska because of attitudes about finfish farming, which has been illegal in Alaska since 1990, 35 years. Finfish farming is the raising of fish for their entire life in a pen. I just want to point out a term here, finfish. Finfish is used to differentiate between shellfish and finfish. Shellfish have shells, exoskeletons. Think oysters, scallops, shrimp, lobsters, anything with something hard on its outside you see in the ocean. Finfish have fins. Think carp, tilapia, salmon. Basically, what most people think of when they hear the word fish. A lot of Alaskans are concerned finfish farming harms wild populations and wild fisheries. This is what many people think of when they hear the word aquaculture, which is a general term meaning the farming of anything in the water. Fish, shellfish, seaweed.
But I think that shellfish aquaculture is so new in Alaska that people are excited by the prospect of it. Everyone I've met has been like dubious at first until I start talking about it. And then once I explain what it is and what it isn't, people seem to have a much better response to it than just right off the bat. When they hear aquaculture, they hear, like doing stuff in the water that isn't fishing. So I think that the community response has generally been higher because everyone in Alaska loves oysters. Alaskans eat a lot of oysters.
Speaking of attitudes, a lot of ocean farmers have to work with their communities as well as the ocean. I asked Aldo what that was like in Maine.
Yeah, there's a huge problem in Maine with the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard folks, the people who own a house there are lucky enough to own a summer home, and they're only there for 3 months out of the year, and they feel that entitles them to dictate how the working waterfront is used and how people make a living, people who live there full time. And Alaska currently doesn't have as much of an issue with that because there's just so much more space in Alaska. There currently isn't that issue. You don't have this sort of, to my eyes, selfish competition between the people who want to protect their view versus the people who want to make a living and want to support their families.
I asked Aldo if he had any advice for somebody moving from Maine to Alaska to start an ocean farm.
Oh man, all that gear that you've got in your backyard or in your garage, pack it up and ship it if you can, because stuff up here is pricey, and everything we take for granted down south, being on a road system, is definitely every.
So quickly, in Alaska, when you hear the term down south, it's referring to the lower 48 states. It's not referring to what most people call the southern states. So down south is really the lower 48. And also, you hear the term road system a lot. Road system just means there's a road connecting you to the rest of the United States. Off the road system, like we are in Sitka, we're only accessible by boat or by plane.
Every tool, every little scrap of of gear you got, if you can throw it in a carry-on, use those Alaska Airlines perks to get up here. Because I can't tell you how many times I've wished that I'd thrown that extra tool in my bag when I moved here. And honestly, you're probably going to run into people when I moved here, I met someone who, I met a handful of people who went to the college that was in my town, Bowdoin, and then a whole bunch of people who lived 20 minutes away from me in Maine. And it's like, how in all this, how do we both end up in Sitka? So be prepared to run into some people you might know.
Talking about the difficulties finding gear, going to the hardware store and not finding the stuff, or maybe there are no hardware stores. That can be a challenge with ocean farming, especially in remote areas like Alaska. But I also want to ask Aldo, what makes it so attractive to be an oyster farmer? Here's part of what he said.
And from the farming side of things, there's people who want to die on their farms, like it's just like some fishermen want to die on their fishing boat. Like it's just, you really like what you're doing. You're feeding your friends, you're feeding your neighborhood, you're feeding your community. You're growing a product that's objectively good for the environment and good for, the communities that it's put into. And it's a great way to, spend the time we have on this earth and make some money and help out your community. It's one of the few ways to work the water that isn't inherently extractive, because you are putting animals in there that are cleaning up the water, providing habitat for other fish species and other animals that are out there, as well as drawing down ocean carbon. I say it's a huge bundle of wins for me.
I'm curious about these environmental benefits of oyster farming. Oysters cleaning the water with their filter feeding. I found some articles that say one oyster can filter up to 50 gallons a day. Oysters also take in carbon, like Aldo was just saying, to make their shells, which might help with ocean acidification. It's fascinating. I hope to have a future episode about all this. Speaking of the future, how does Aldo see the future of the mariculture industry?
I'm super excited about the future of the industry here, the industry worldwide. I think it's really coming into its own as a thing, as a viable way for people to make money and produce food. I'm excited to see where, not just my background's in oysters, obviously, but where all the other shellfish species that we can culture, that we can grow, where they go. There's some really exciting stuff being done with scallops, and people have been farming mussels forever, and those are, I'm hoping, as Americans, we can eat more seaweed and eat more seafood and eat more shellfish, and grow these industries domestically, I hope.
If you met somebody who's never had any seafood, what's one thing you recommend that they would try?
Mussels. I think mussels are really good. Mussels or shrimp. It's a toss-up between the two. But I think a really well-prepared bowl of mussels is tough to beat. It's really tasty, and I've met very few people who dislike it. If you can get over the texture, as long as the texture isn't, for me, the texture is my biggest impediment to enjoying the fruits of the sea. But if that's not a problem for you, then I think mussels are really cool and really interesting and really tasty.
I like that term, fruits of the sea. If there's one thing I've learned about the ocean, it certainly is fruitful. There's all sorts of stuff living and growing in it. Speaking of learning and growing, we've covered a lot in this episode. We had a brief sketch of oyster farming, from hatchery to FLUPSY to grow out. We heard a professional rank ocean smells. We got into a little bit about how ocean farmers interact with communities. We talked about finfish farming and NIMBY issues. We talked about how oysters can bring people together. I've been trying to think of other foods that people can eat in a circle. The only thing I can think of so far is cracking walnuts, roasting marshmallows, and bobbing for apples. There seems to be something very primal or fundamental about opening something up and eating it with a group. If you go to kelpshow.com, I'll include vocab words and links, including a link to the aquaculture program where Aldo works. I believe now's a good time to apply. Full disclosure, I just finished it and really gained a lot. I really enjoyed talking to Aldo. Thanks so much for taking the time to pop into the Mariculture Minute studio, which incidentally was a classroom I reserved with Aldo's help. Thanks to Alaska Sea Grant, the University of Alaska Southeast Sitka campus, Professor Angela Bowers, Sarah Ebersol, Brenna Hackinson, assistant producer for this episode, Desmond Murphy. Special thanks to Walden Murphy for providing the music, and thank you for listening. You can find Mariculture Minute on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and of course you can contact me, ask questions about the show, suggest topics, offer criticisms at kelpshow.com. Oh, and also on Instagram at kelpshow. I think that's everywhere you can find me on the internet, if you're even looking. My name is Jeremiah Murphy. I'm here in Sitka, Alaska, where it is about to rain.